Okay, folks, this is Mark Joyner, and I'm here with a great, dear old friend of mine, the legendary Spike Humor. Spike is the right-hand man of Jay Abraham himself. Now, if a lot of you don't know who Jay Abraham is, and I imagine if you're watching this, you probably do. But to let you know what my opinion of him is, at least, I was willing to share the stage with Jay as the co-keynote, and I never do that. And I don't think Jay ever does that either, by the way. And that shows you how much enormous respect I have for Jay Abraham. Jay is an absolute legend. And if you don't know about him, you're going to probably hear some stories about him during this conversation. He is the man who is partially responsible for Tony Robbins' rise to fame. Now, Tony is, of course, responsible for his own rocket ride to stardom. But Jay was partially the marketing genius behind that. And Jay has helped some of the most enormous campaigns that got the Ranker launched. You'll probably be hearing a little bit about that. And what a lot of folks don't know who Jay is that Spike is the guy who is the guy behind the guy. And I've got, a guy behind me as well. And if I didn't have him behind me, I would not be able to get where I am. And folks like this do not get enough credit because a creative person like me who's constantly on the move, I need to have an anchor to pull me down. And if I didn't have that anchor to pull me down, I would be shot off into space somewhere and I wouldn't be able to accomplish things. And I would be scattered all over the place. In the military, and I was a veteran of military intelligence. Then I was an artillery officer after that. We call this guy the XO, the executive officer. A good commander is only as good as his executive officer. And the executive officer comes out with a lot of things. He comes to the table with skills of organization. He keeps, things organized and in place, but he's also in a position to observe things about a man that no one else is able to see. And my desire today is to extract from Spike the wisdom of Jay Abraham that most people are not hearing, because I imagine that I'm going to be learning an enormous amount of stuff, even though I've probably read the most important of Jay's stuff. And I think I know Jay's philosophy pretty well. I'm completely open to being surprised and blown away by this conversation. And I'll just add to that, Spike, Spike and I have known each other for a long time. When he and I met, we had instant rapport. We knew things about each other just instantly by kind of looking at each other and knowing each other. And there are very few people in this world for whom I have this much respect. So I'm very, very proud to be hanging out with the Spike Humor right now.
Oh, thank you, Mark. You're a very kind man. You've been a guide, a mentor, a friend, a colleague, an inspiration, and a model for me for a long time as well.
Well, thank you for saying that, man. Coming from you, that really means a lot. And people need to hear these things. Even people with enormous egos like me, perhaps especially, need to hear that. So thank you. So let's dive into this, man. I've got so many questions I want to ask you, and I'm curious as to see where this conversation is going to go, and I'm open to it going in any direction. But I just want to ask you, just to get a general sense here, why should folks care about what you learned from Jay? Now, I just gave him what I think is a just introduction, but I probably didn't even do justice to the utter genius of Jay Abraham. So how would you answer that?
Well, it's a great question, Mark. I think a number of things. I had the opportunity to work with Jay in a variety of capacities for 6 or 7 years.
Yeah.
Before that, he was brought him on as a board member for a company I was running a few years before that. He was a guy that I followed for years and years and years. So I think, I had a variety of perspectives. One, I saw him as the direct response marketer and the brilliant copywriter that he was when that was his focus. I saw him work firsthand as a consultant and also as a board member for a company that I was running. And then I had, a period of about 6 or 7 years where I worked with Jay in his business. I worked with him as a speaker. Jay was a client of mine. He was a mentor of mine. So I think one of the things that I was able to do over the course of 10 or 11 years, maybe longer, was to observe Jay in terms of what he did, how he did it, why he did it, and with whom he did it in a lot of different ways and from a lot of different perspectives. And so, it's like one of those things, Mark, when, you have your perspective, I have mine, then we have kind of a third party perspective. But when we have the ability to kind of see things almost in a holistic, kind of a holographic way, we learn things in a different way, and we see things in a different way, and we observe things that we wouldn't perhaps see in a one-to-one conversation. We see the interaction with the world, we see the interaction with clients, we see the interaction with people's thinking processes. And I think because of that, it allowed me to not only become friends and colleagues with Jay, but also to observe his processes of not only how he solved problems, but also how he developed solutions, and how he would learn from one opportunity or one challenge in one market, and then be able to take that and apply it with a different situation, with a different client or a different company.
That is a really great answer. And, a lot of folks don't understand how vitally important process is. I'm a stickler for that. And I think that if you get process right, it's one of the absolute keys to scaling and blowing businesses up. And if you get it wrong, doesn't matter how brilliant your ideas are, you are just simply not going to be able to scale.
Right.
So, yeah, that's pretty awesome. Let me ask you this to pre-frame this a little bit more. If you could give a couple of examples of some of the most astounding things you've seen Jay accomplish from a marketing perspective. So I really want the listener to do what we called in the Army, leaning forward in the foxhole, because man, if you miss the utter importance of what we're talking about here, you are robbing yourself. And I think you've probably got a few examples that will do better justice to what I said in terms of.
I'll start with probably the first most dramatic one that I had seen. As in addition to my my personal and professional interactions, the first program that I ever did with Jay was in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. And this goes back probably 11, 12 years ago. And Jay was doing a $25,000 program where he would do the hot seats, where he would bring a company up on stage, and basically he would do a diagnosis and a prescription, and basically kind of take that business apart and put it back together. And for me, it was a little bit unique because, number one, I thought not only was he brilliant at doing it, but I had the opportunity to participate with him on it, which was not something I had done before. So I got to see how he thought about different businesses in different ways, but also different businesses in different markets, different industries with different challenges and in different phases and stages in their business. And to bring somebody up on stage and charge them $25,000, give them an hour and a half hot seat consult with 100% money back guarantee if they didn't get the outcome or the result that they wanted. I mean, to me, it was a little bit more than a tightrope. It really wasn't something that I was quite used to. I mean, I had been consulting for a long time, worked with a lot of businesses in a lot of situations, but to be able to do it right there live on stage, number one, was a different type of pressure and was a different type of environment. But on top of that, the one thing that really stood out, in addition to the diversity of skill sets and diversity of situations, was that over the course of 5 days, how one situation tied into another, and how one perspective from another business would actually apply to another, and how over a period of time he took those 30 or 40 businesses and basically turned them into colleagues and collaborators for the growth and development and participation for everyone else in the room. So it really was an amazing thing.
Wow, that's pretty astounding. And I mean, just straight up, that takes balls, but it takes enormous confidence in your ability to be able to bring that outcome out. And I want folks to understand here, this is not just a confidence game here, right? I mean, you could take a guy who is a very talented grifter and he could probably pull that off. But what really makes this special here is that, and look, all marketing has an element of that, right? Marketing is, in a sense, a confidence game. You have to get people to believe, but Jay's actually getting people those results. And I imagine that the businesses, after having that interaction with Jay, saw enormous upside growth in their businesses.
Yeah, they did, Mark. And the second thing that stood out about that particular event was, like I said, it was the first opportunity that I had to participate with Jay on stage. And as gigantic as Jay is in his contribution to marketing and to business, he was very open and very receptive to my perspective, but also the input that I was offering people. And from that, I mean, we ended up doing programs together for about 7 or 8 years. But really, what amazed me was that even though it was Jay's program, obviously Jay's has a brand, a reputation, a repertoire, and a track record that isn't parallel, isn't met by many, and is exceeded by even fewer. But he was willing to take a step back if there was something that he felt that I knew more about. Now, Jay and I had worked in some other capacities together, and he had seen some things that I had done. But if it was something that Jay felt that, number one, I was either better suited for or had a different perspective, it didn't become a situation of egos or competition between us. It really became about the outcome and about the client.
Yeah, that's amazing. Look, most people don't have that kind of ego strength. And, that to me is the sign of what I suppose Maslow would have called transcendence. I mean, you've got a lot of, egocentric geniuses out there who are not willing to see their flaws. And those people reach a certain height. But when you can add that sort of egolessness to it, then that's when the, just astounding things happen. Can we give an example of just some of the specific campaigns that people might recognize? I mean, do I understand this correctly that Jay is partially responsible for what happened with the enormous explosion of Proactive, for example?
Well, and that I don't know, Mark. I mean, it certainly could be. And Jay is responsible for a lot of campaigns and a lot of programs and a lot of products directly. But indirectly, one of the things that would come up quite often in programs that we would do together, or consults that we would do together, or masterminds that we would do together through other marketers and other campaigns and other companies that really he didn't work with directly, but he touched indirectly and was able to impact through a lot of his work and a lot of his case studies.
Right. Beautiful. So let's get into some of the essence of this here. So, for the guy who is sort of a Jay neophyte, if you could distill the essence of Jay's business philosophy into a sentence or two, and I know that's probably maybe an impossible task, but how would you respond to that? Gun to the head, Gary Halbert, gun to the head style.
Well, I'll give you two things. First is Jay's strategy of preeminence, and Jay, talks about this and has been using it for about 20 years, and he actually gives credit to someone else earlier in his career for developing that. But there were certain principles around the strategy of preeminence about how you treated your clients and the fact that you really had to fall in love with them, not just treat them like a customer. You had to really put them under your care and your guidance and really look after them almost like a benefactor, a protector, an advocate, an evangelist, and someone who really could not only argue for their success, but also could help them communicate and articulate their value proposition to the marketplace. And there's certainly other principles around that. But the other thing that was really an eye-opening thing for me, because I was a marketer, but my original business was doing business consulting, really in terms of efficiency and optimization and leadership and all those types of things. So I didn't really understand the impact of direct marketing and the importance of testing. And Jay was and still is, was just a zealot for, number one, allowing the data to speak, number two, being able to test, and number three, being able to have the ability to use a variety of approaches to find out, number one, not only what would work, but also what would work better over time. And those were the two things that, Jay just did religiously, and he did it almost unconsciously. He wouldn't just do a single offer. He wouldn't do a single email. He wouldn't do a single ad. He wouldn't do a single piece of copy. He would sometimes do as many as 7 or 8. And then what he would do is that he would obviously take the one that was the control, the one that performed the best, and that became the new standard until he would test against it over and over again. And it didn't matter whether it was marketing, it could be a sales process, it could be basically anything outside of the mechanical side of a business. Jay was just a stickler for making sure that you didn't stand just on the one platform or the one approach, that you would have the ability to test it. And then I guess the last one, Mark, and I said I'd give you 2, but I'll give you 3, was his power Parthenon. Jay would use the analogy of, if you build your marketing based on one strategy or one focus or one approach, and something happens with that, they change the search engine algorithm, they ban you from Facebook or whatever, your business all could collapse if the entirety of your revenue was driven by a single marketing stream or a single marketing approach. So Jay developed what he called the power Parthenon, which was modeled after the Greek Parthenon that had a lot of pillars that stood the test of time. And his belief and philosophy and approach was always to have multiple focuses on how you would market, how you would communicate with your customers. So not only was it incremental in the fact that you had 6 or 7 approaches, but also became exponential and also became much more sustainable, much more scalable, much more predictable over time, because you weren't overly dependent just on a single approach to the market.
Yeah, I love that. And I tell you, that's one of the things that, immediately enamored me to Jay. So I didn't even know who Jay was. I had a very strange introduction into business. I started out, in the military, and I'm a totally self-taught guy. I did not have any formal marketing education. I didn't read any marketing books, and I started applying things that I knew from psychology and marketing metaphorically to business. And so I sort of developed my own business philosophy. And I'm very fortunate in that I was in the right place at the right time, and that the ideas that I had ended up working, exceptionally well, obviously. And then when I was introduced to Jay, I was really astonished at how similar our thinking was in a lot of things. Anyway, there's this theory that we're all connected through this field of some sort, and that
Right.
perhaps we're learning that information from the same infinite source. And I know Jay might not object to that kind of discussion as well, because I know he can get a little spiritual with certain things too.
Right. Well, and also, I mean, Jay has been very, I guess, humble in the fact that, as brilliant as he is and as successful as he's been, that he had a lot of teachers as well. Now, Jay's a little bit older than me, and he's probably quite a bit older than you.
Yes.
So a lot of his learnings and a lot of the things that were people who were his models and mentors, either directly or indirectly, through personal relationships, professional relationships, or through books or teaching. Jay was a student of marketing, and he studied the Ross Reeves and the people going back even before that, and looking at some of the things that Bernays did, and he was a student of language, he was a student of direct response, but he was also a student of business, and so he would look at not only how business was transacted, but also how business was perceived. And Jay was the guy, I teach this in my own programs and I share it with my own clients. The difference between sales and marketing. I have my own distinctions, but Jay was very, very good that if you had the ability to articulate a problem and you had the ability to really see it from the eyes of the market and from the mind of the market, that people would automatically assume in most cases that because you articulated the problem more clearly, or you were able to speak their unspoken desires or their unspoken challenges, that people in many cases would almost assume that you were the best person to provide the solution because you understood the problem better than they did. And in many cases, he was able to speak to things with a language that people couldn't articulate. They knew that they wanted to have a transactional relationship, but they weren't necessarily able to articulate the real value proposition of what that meant in terms of the quality of their life or the quality of their business. And I learned that from Jay probably more than anyone else, because he was such a stickler with his philosophy of the strategy of preeminence. He really truly wanted to not only be the spokesperson, but he also wanted to be the advocate, and he also wanted to be the champion for the people that he was working with, but also for the people that they were trying to touch in the marketplace.
Yeah, beautiful. I want to give a couple of Jay Abraham quotes that I remember, and then I want to loop back to a couple of things here because I want to make sure people understand some of the terms that we're talking about here, because they may not have the background. And I also want to make sure that I don't misunderstand some of these terms as well, because I believe, for example, that I have an understanding of what Jay meant when he said preeminence, but I would love to verify that. So we'll loop back to that in a second. But two interesting quotes. So now I saw a recording of Jay at an old Tony Robbins event. I think this is one of Tony Robbins' early business mastery events. Mm-hmm. And, one of these guys came up there just, gushing about how much they were appreciative of stuff Jay was doing for him. And Jay says, "Hey, look, man, it's not me. I'm just the vessel. The universe is talking through me." He said it's something along those lines. And I was struck by the depth of that and the humility. And I endeavor to conduct myself in such a way. The other quote that I wanted to bring up, and I believe that Jay is probably paraphrasing this or quoting someone else, because I've heard this expressed in different ways, but it alludes to some of the things that you were referring to a moment ago, and that's that people, or the masses, are silently begging to be led. Mm-hmm. Is that an original Jay quote, or do you know, quoting someone else on that?
Jay was the first person, and to the best of my recollection, probably the only person that ever spoke it that way. And Jay had this, and still does, has this unique way where he can take a big philosophy or a big concept and put it into a single phrase or into a single sentence or into a single term. And it really truly was, something that that Jay not only believed, but he also practiced. And it's funny because Mark, you're a brilliant marketer, and you're a wonderful copywriter. And I don't know if you identify yourself as a copywriter, but you're a brilliant copywriter, and so you understand the difficulty sometimes of somebody who's a professional copywriter, even though that's not your core focus. But sometimes people would take days, weeks, and sometimes even months writing a copywriting campaign. But Jay had this ability almost to channel copy, and so he could literally sit down and write copy longhand and write pages and pages and pages and pages. So one, I think it speaks to the point about kind of channeling some of that, but also I think it reinforces the fact that people are begging to be led. So he was able to see what it was that people were facing, what it was that people wanted, what it was that people needed, and to be able to see it in a way that he could put it in a piece of copy or in an offer or in a letter that would say, this person not only understands me, but they can see a better future, a better path, a better course for me in my life and my business. And I think it really was that a lot of times people were looking for someone to help them understand what problems they had, what opportunities they were facing, but also to be the guide to kind of steer them along.
You broke up for a second there, Spike. The last thing you said about the guide.
Yeah, just being the fact that people are begging to be led. Sometimes people just need someone to be not only a spokesperson, but also the person who can show them the pathway to move forward and to show them the map to the destination. A lot of times people know where they want to go, but they don't know how to get there. And in many cases, they're waiting for someone to say, hey, you know what? I understand your problem, but I also understand the solution. Let me show you how to do it.
Nice. That, I think, is probably a very good segue into preeminence, but I want to comment on one thing. That was another thing that struck me about the similarities between me and Jay. And a lot of people know the story of me having written a couple of my books in one sitting. So, for example, Irresistible Offer, which is now, in print in 25 languages. It's being used in universities around the world. We're probably going to be doing a second edition here, and I should probably invite you to participate in that, to write a guest chapter, and maybe Jay too, if he'd be generous enough to add that. But I feel that too when I sit down and I write. I don't feel like it's me writing sometimes. I feel like something is writing me. I know that probably is very strange to a lot of people. But I'm offering that to folks who probably find that kind of thing strange, because for several reasons. One is I want people to open their minds up to the possibility of allowing whatever that force is to just come through us and allow it to, and I think humility is part of that. Knowing that you're a smaller part of something much larger is what allows creative folks like us to be able to do that, but also to show that this isn't just an exercise of somebody sitting down and 100 monkeys on a typewriter banging stuff out. When I was able to do that, and then that book was able to be so successful, I hope that people understand that it's a very serious phenomenon that we're talking about here. And if Jay was using that same phenomenon to come up with the just incredibly amazing copy that he did, that did so enormously well, folks should be open to that too. So let's loop back then to preeminence, because I do think that people silently begging to be led ties to that. Mm-hmm. So how would you define preeminence?
Well, to me, and I think Jay would probably echo this as well. I mean, he has some principles around preeminence, but so many times people try to compete almost on an incremental level, right? They're trying to be just slightly better than their competitor. They're just trying to be slightly more profitable than a business in their marketplace. And so sometimes what happens is that people kind of model the marketing, they model the sales processes, they model the business systems that people in their industry focus on. But in order to be preeminent, it allows you to have a whole different perspective, because you're not just competing in a single industry. You're not competing just with the business around the corner. You're able to transcend the transactional approach that people that are in your space kind of adopt as a norm. And so it was not just from a business standpoint, but it was also from a relationship standpoint. As a business consultant, Mark, sometimes people seek you out for advice, and I've been a consultant and have run companies for about 35 years, and a lot of times people expect you just to talk to them, right? Talk at them, right? You sit across the desk and you say, okay, I want you to do this, I want you to do that. But, I think a lot of times, and especially with some of the work that I was doing in turnarounds when I was a turnaround guy, it really was being able to sit on the other side of the desk, at the same side of the desk, with the person, you kind of put your arm around and say, you know what, we're going to get through this together. And I think, when Jay talks about preeminence, it's not just about, okay, I'm going to give you the solution. It's, we're really going to be in this thing together. I mean, and if you look at some of the fees that, Jay's charged over the years, I mean, Jay was charging 10 times what I was charging as a consultant. And I couldn't believe, the kind of money he was getting for his programs, for his books, for his consulting sessions and things. But I think that was one of the things that stood out almost universally when he was working with someone. It wasn't about the consulting relationship. It was about having a higher level of relationship with people, but also helping them, transcend the competitive, the limitations of their competition, the limitations of their industry, and to really allow themselves to go far outside perhaps what were the industry norms, or perhaps what were the norms of the neighborhood, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so in doing that, you really have to have not only a higher vision for yourself, you have to have a higher vision for what's possible.
Interesting. So let me make sure I understand that, because I think that there's a very subtle distinction here that a lot of people might miss. And I think traditionally when people talk about preeminence, the strategy of preeminence, when I hear this, hanging out with other marketers talking about it, they see it as, I want to be seen as the best in my industry. And if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is that is a surface level understanding of what preeminence is, and that the ultimate way to achieve that preeminence is to have a real, genuine connection with that audience, right? Because you can't really have that high level relationship with people. You can't really be seen as the best and have that last unless there is something real going on there. Because somebody could, it would be relatively easy for a guy to con the market into thinking that they're the best at something, right?
Sure.
But for that to be sustainable, that requires an intimate connection with the customers and with that vast marketplace. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, and I think you're spot on, Mark, and I appreciate the clarification, because sometimes for me it's very obvious, but it really is. I mean, because you can have a bigger billboard, you can have a bigger marquee, and I guess technically you could say you're preeminent, right? Because you have the lead billing in a play or a movie, right? That might make you preeminent for an event. That might make you premier for a period of time. But preeminence to me, transcends a single event. It transcends the small environment in which you're competing, right? You and I can talk about who's the best copywriter, who's the best direct response marketer. But if you want to be preeminent with your clients, with your marketplace, with your audience, with the world, with society, community, it doesn't matter. It goes beyond the simple side of the transaction. It really goes beyond. And I don't want to be too woo-woo, but it almost is a spiritual connection, in the sense that energetically you're aligned to try to accomplish something together that you couldn't do by yourself.
Yeah, man, that's fantastic. And I want to point something else out here that a lot of folks might miss. And when we talk about markets, people, we tend to dehumanize the market because we're talking about a mass of people. But you immediately went to the guy on the other side of the table, right? Because when we're talking about a market, we're talking about a relationship, yes, with a mass of people, but that is a mass of individuals. And you have an individual relationship with all those people in a certain sense.
Sure. Yeah, really, truly, Mark. I mean, you're speaking to millions, one person at a time, right?
That's right.
Most people don't care if you're shouting in a stadium, if they don't feel that they're the one that you're speaking to, right? I mean, Mark. I mean, crap. I mean, when you and I first met, I think we spoke in front of 6,000 or 7,000 people. And I'm sure most of the people that were sitting there weren't thinking, okay, I wonder if they're relating to every single person in the room. They were saying, okay, what's in it for me, and what do you have to share with me that will allow me to have a better business, or improve my life, or get the results, or the opportunities, or have the solutions to the problems that I'm facing. And if people don't feel that you're speaking to them one-on-one, even though you may be speaking to thousands or even millions in some cases, they're not going to relate to the message, and they're certainly not going to relate to you as a person who's conveying that message.
Yeah, man. I'll tell you what, it's really interesting, because when I talk to people, when I talk to groups of people, or when I shoot a YouTube video, I'm really thinking about that. I'm thinking about the fact that energetically, to put it, again, in slightly woo-woo terms, I am pushing this energy out to an individual person, and I know I'm going to have some impact on this person's life. And I feel an enormous responsibility that impact is something that's going to be positive, and it's what they genuinely need. It's what I'm genuinely promising. And I think that's one of the things that allowed me, aside from all of the mind control marketing and all the stuff like that, that I talk about, I think that may be far more important than all of the psychological trickery, that a lot of people like to talk about.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, Mark. I mean, because you mentioned Tony Robbins, at the beginning when Jay worked with Tony, and I mean, you understand, NLP and a lot of the persuasion things better than most. So I won't go down that path, but I know one of the things that Tony does when he has his 15, 20,000 people in a room getting ready to walk on fire. One of the things that he will look at, he will develop connections with people that are unconscious leaders in the room. And he knows that when he's able to develop that connection, that the people around them have an unconscious connection. And next thing you know, you can take one person and you can influence 10, and then you can influence 100, and then you can influence thousands. And, and when you're looking at marketing, or you're looking at being able to sell, or you're being able to bring a product or a service or a message to a market, being able to understand that there's certain people, number one, that if you can connect with people, when I look at things like joint ventures, right? This is something that I learned from Jay before I met him. I learned from his work, and that is rather than going out and trying to attract one customer or one sale at a time, if I could develop a connection with somebody who already had influence, credibility, and ideally a connection, and maybe even a willingness to introduce me to that marketplace, not only did my credibility get elevated, but the level of trust and the level of connection that I had with that marketplace or that client base was accelerated dramatically. And so being able to connect with people one at a time certainly has value. But being able to connect with people who have the connection with those people already, and then being able to put it in such a way that it benefits everyone, not just the person that you're doing the deal with, but also bringing value to their marketplace, allows you to accelerate those things. But none of those things happen if you don't have the ability to develop a relationship with people one at a time.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I have to tell you, when I went to Unleash the Power Within, that I was getting tons of direct eye contact from Tony from the stage. And when you say that, that's interesting. I wonder, who knows? And maybe he has this magical ability to have that, to make everyone in the room feel like that, which is quite possible.
Yeah. Well, believe it or not, there's actually a structure around there. One day at another time, you and I can have a conversation about it, that, how Tony does it and how some other people do it. But obviously, Mark, and you're a humble guy, but I'm sure, and I'm not speaking for Tony, but I'm sure, he noticed something around you, not just with you individually, and I'm sure that was part of it, but also there are probably people around you that energetically or from a rapport standpoint, from a body language standpoint, were following you in certain ways. And so by developing that relationship with you, with eye contact, he was able not only to develop a connection with you, he was able to influence and develop a connection with the people around you.
That's profound stuff. Wow, we're only 2 questions into this here, and I'm already, learning so many new things. I want to loop back to one more thing before I get on to the next planned question I have. So this is always a good indicator of a great discussion for me when it goes off on exciting tangents that teach me new things. I want to hear from you. You talked about the difference between sales and marketing, and I think that most people have a very deep misunderstanding of that. Yeah. I would love to hear your take on that.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is something, I don't know that it's an original thought, but it's my own articulation. So I'll share it with you. But I certainly learned this by example, not by terminology, from Jay. But coming from the corporate world, it used to make me nuts because people would say sales and marketing, which was asked backwards, first of all, excuse my language. Right? Not at all. Yeah. It's difficult to sell if you haven't figured out a way to market. But a lot of times people would equate them like they were the same thing. They'd say sales and marketing, right? Well, to me, they're similar and they do overlap, almost like in a Venn diagram, but they're distinctions. And to me, marketing is about conveying value, but sales is about earning trust, right? And so the better you are at conveying that value, the easier it is for you to earn that trust, right? And without trust, very rarely does a transaction occur. And if it does occur, very rarely does it occur on an ongoing basis. So to me, marketing is about conveying value. Sales is about earning trust. And the better you are at marketing, the more effective you can be at sales from an efficiency standpoint.
Interesting. Well, we could go off on a long tangent about that, but I think that's good. And would you say that Jay's philosophy would see that in the same light?
Yeah, it's funny because you remember Chet Holmes, and Chet worked together for years and years and years, and Chet was brilliant with sales structures, sales systems, and sales training, and all those types of things. And Jay, being the marketer that he was, certainly they had overlapping skills in certain areas, but it was almost like two pillars holding up the same roof. And so Jay's focus would be, okay, how do you communicate the message? And Chet was really about, okay, how do you generate the transaction? Right. And so we were working together. I mean, to me, that was some of the best work that came out of any collaboration, that Jay had, and probably any collaboration that Chet had at the time. And so to me, it was more observational, looking at those guys. They came about, they had the same end in mind, but they had different approaches to how they went about it.
I'll tell you an interesting Chet Holmes story. The first time I physically met him, so Chet was my initial conduit to Jay, in fact, years ago when I was, the brash, up and coming, internet marketing guru that everybody was following. And so Chet approaches me and he's like, hey, we're noticing what you're doing. We want to do some business together. And we did some fun stuff together. Like, boom, instantly we started having fun. And so Chet came out to LA and he sits me down and he opens up this little flip chart and he starts pitching himself to me, right? And so people know, by the way, so Chet is the author of The Ultimate Sales Machine, which is just one of these just absolute best, sales books ever written, and has done tremendous work with Jay. And Jay had enormous respect for him and was enormously respected by so many people, and just a beautiful human being on many levels, who also, by the way, spoke at Tony's events and taught a lot of this stuff. But that actually, it kind of, illustrates how Chet was a sales guy. I mean, that was his way of communicating with me, was like, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to establish this trust with you, and I'm going to do that through this formatted way that I know works.
Right.
And it did work, man. I got to say, I was sitting there, I knew what he was doing, and I just sat there with the whole time, enjoying it, laughing up every little moment of it. Okay. The next thing I want to ask you is, and this is probably an exceedingly hard question to answer, but if what would you say would be the 3 most important marketing lessons you learned from working with Jay that would have the biggest immediate impact on business owners that are listening to this right now?
Yeah, the first one, Mark, and I just touched on it earlier, I'm going to say joint ventures, right? I'm going to use that term.
Yeah.
But it goes far beyond joint ventures. I mean, to me, a joint venture is 2 companies coming together for a specific activity or a specific endeavor. But to me, when I use the term joint ventures, I'm talking about joint ventures, strategic alliances, referral programs, endorsements, cross promotions, all those types of things. And Jay was better at it than anyone I ever met. I mean, by a magnitude of 10. And when I started working with Jay, and I saw that, number one, how he went about developing those relationships, but also how he cultivated those relationships, not only did it allow him to build his business, it allowed him to create value with the people that he was doing the transactions with, but he was able to build his brand. He was able to build his access. I mean, Jay's pretty well known, and people that know him well and work with Jay, is that Jay is big on investing first, right? He would say something like, look, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to help you develop a campaign. I'm going to help you develop an approach. I'm going to help you develop a marketing strategy for you to go out and create additional value or to build your business or whatever. And I'm not going to charge you a dime. Yeah. The only thing we ask in return is that if and when this is successful, and I expect that it will be, is that you endorse me to your list 2 or 3 times, right? And so what that would allow him to do, number one, he would demonstrate the fact that there was firsthand value. Number 2, people would benefit from it strategically, financially, and tactically in many ways. But also, it would give Jay access, to a whole group of people that he might not have had access to otherwise. I mean, he did it with Tony. He did it with lots and lots and lots of other people. When long before the days of email marketing and social media marketing and how people do some of the product launches and those types of things that have been around for the last 5 or 6 years, Jay was able to do that with mail houses. He was able to do it with anybody who had a database, and he was able to to go from 0 to 60 in one fell swoop, and sometimes in industries where he got access to a market because he earned an endorsement through somebody who already had access to that marketplace. So that would be the first one.
I'll tell you a story before we go on to 2 and 3. Yet another story of the early days of Jay and Chetan and I, playing around. So Jay hadn't yet gotten into the internet, right? Because this was all brand new stuff. And Jay comes from the older school, right, where they were very skeptical of this new platform, and they saw it all quite rightly. They knew that, look, it's just another communication platform. Let's see how it plays out. And now, they were trying to figure out from me, all right, how does all this work, right? And I'm telling them everything I know, and we're sharing knowledge, and it was wonderful. And then when Jay made his first, what I consider to be his first really significant move on the internet, I'll tell you what that was. And I got to observe this because I think I'm probably the first guy they pitched on this. And I turned him down, and I'll tell you why in a second. What he did was he took one of his classic books, turned it into an e-document, and then he told people, he said, hey, I want you, to give this away to all of your list for free, but people have to come in to my site to get it. So basically, Jay just had this genius of saying, all right, I'm just grabbing everyone's database, right?
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, and it worked, man. I mean, so that was, I didn't see Jay do anything on the internet like significant before that, but then right after that, boom, he had this enormous list. He came in and instantly had an enormous list of highly qualified people. And I think that that's a really great example of, just the, infinite number of ways that you can do joint thinking.
Well, the last program that Jay and I did together in China was probably 5 years ago, maybe 6. It's been quite a while. But we used that same strategy, so I'm going to give you credit for it from now on, because I took credit for it. But I'm sure you did it long before I did. But that the mainland Chinese market is somewhat notorious for pirating or sharing without reciprocation when it comes to certain products and things, right? So when we were going to China, one of the concerns that Jay had was that if we take the programs over there, if we take products over there, they're going to be pirated and maybe sold without compensation or maybe even pirated where the fact somebody else put their name and their face on it, right? Because it does from time to time. So I said to Jay, I said, what, I think we can use this to our advantage. And I went to the promoter and we took some of the reports that Jay had that he had no price tag on. But I went to the promoter and I said, I'm going to give you some of these if you would translate them and give them to some of your salespeople and some of the people that are promoting the event. But you have to tell them that they can't give it to anybody else because this is worth like $400, right? Well, the first event we went, I think there were probably 1,200 people in the room, and probably 900 of them had the report. Right? Yeah. So of course you can't give it away. So it really became kind of a marketing piece, and we got it translated for free. So it's a very similar thing, but being able to take that and access, give access to it, and then being able to either get the people in a room or get them in a database, then allows you to have that relationship on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, beautiful. I want to interject something really quick here. A lot of people in today's political and social environment, might hear a comment like that about China and think that, that it's sort of like a racist statement. I think it's an enormous mistake to categorize it that way, because we're talking about different cultures, and cultures have differences. And if we fail to recognize those differences, we are going to have our lunch eaten in the business battlefield. Because what you said about China, I have to corroborate, is absolutely true. And anyone who's done business over there knows that their sense of ethics in China is very different from ours.
Yeah.
It's a complete.
And this, and Mark, just so it doesn't come across, that I'm being totally insensitive. In that situation, it wasn't, like people felt that they were doing something inappropriate or something wrong. It was really like, okay, well, you're bringing this to the market, so therefore we have not only the ability but also the opportunity and maybe even the obligation, to share it with other people, right? I mean, just a real quick aside. First time I went to China, they had this thing called queuing day, and I don't know if you know what that is, but
no, I don't.
When you went from communist, from the communist form of economics, not just government, to a more capitalistic economy, people weren't used to having free access to things, right? So people, in many cases, they would rush, for goods and things like that when they were available. So people generally didn't have a sense of lining up. So, in some cities and in some companies, they created queuing day where they just basically taught people, and kind of drilled people in lining up to wait their turn to get access to certain things, because there were so many people and it was such a new thing. And it certainly isn't a moral judgment. The bottom line is that you can go to any country in the world and people have certain norms and certain customs, and it doesn't make them right or wrong. It just makes it, part of the environment. And now, for me, I've been to China a half a dozen times, been to probably 10 cities there. So I'm not speaking for 1.5 billion people, but what I am saying is that there was such a hunger and such a desire to learn and to absorb information. I didn't see it as something that was covert. I didn't see it as something that was corrupt. I saw it more as more of a sense of excitement than anything else.
I'm really glad you made that distinction, and let me just add one thing to that. So folks understand that, I'm not trying to malign the people there as well. I'm a deep student of Chinese military history, for example. That I have an enormous respect, for the philosophical background of China. I mean, there's just so much to learn from that culture, and I'm kind of obsessed with those things. So, hopefully folks are not, thinking that we're picking on them. Because you put it beautifully, right? There are wonderful things, there are not so wonderful things in every single culture, and the value systems are very different as well. And sometimes what we, make a moral judgment about is merely a misunderstanding of the differential of values more.
Well, Mark, and I guess kind of leading back into the other part of your question, this wasn't the one I was going to give you, but I will give you this, and that is. One of the things that made Jay really successful early in his career, and I think carried through his career today, is that he was able to see how something in one industry would translate into another industry in a different way, right? Because he worked in so many industries, he was able to kind of take what was kind of the norm over here and make it kind of novel and unique over there. But there was no way that he could do that. There was no way anyone could do that without understanding that there's subtle distinctions between industries, between countries, between continents, between cultures, between languages. And so, what I think Jay was able to do better than anyone I met or anyone I've ever worked with is that he was able to recognize those distinctions in one industry and show people how they could apply that in another industry. But without knowing what both of those industries had done, could do, couldn't do, there was no way that he'd be able to translate that strategy or that structure of what he was sharing from one industry to the next. And the example that I use, Mark, is the example of Henry Ford, right? In the assembly line. People talk about, oh my God, he revolutionized industry. He came up with the assembly line. Well, it's one of those things, Mark, that if I do what everybody else does in my industry, and I do it better than anybody else, I can optimize what it is that I do, right? Best practices. I can look at what everybody else does and, okay, you know what, if I can do it a little bit better, I can optimize it. But generally, optimization comes by studying people in your industry, right? Innovation comes by studying people outside your industry. And what Henry Ford did is that he looked at the slaughtering industry, right? And basically, he saw that they were taking beef and they were disassembling them. Right, so he took that and just reversed it and created the assembly line. Right, so now all of a sudden, instead of taking cattle apart, you're putting cars together. And so by being able to study other industries and being able to study other practices and other approaches in different businesses, it really allows you to see things from a different perspective. And the more exposure that you have to different countries or different companies or different industries, I think the better your ability as a consultant, as an advisor, as a business person, the better your ability becomes to take new approaches and become adaptable, become flexible, and become innovative in your industry and in your company and in your life.
Oh, I could not agree with you more, and I'm so glad you brought that up. I mean, again, that is exactly how I got into online marketing, in those early days, and that particular sensibility has informed pretty much every aspect of my life, and I think it's one of the secrets of my creativity. And in fact, it's funny, we looping this back to Chinese military strategy. There's this thing called the 36 stratagems, which give 36 historical stories. Right. That's a whole other rabbit hole we could go down. But they say that if you understand those and you understand how to apply those metaphorically to different situations, it gives you an enormous advantage in every single aspect of your life.
Mm-hmm.
And I've applied that to business and to, well, I was a war fighter and everything else as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so joint ventures was number one. What would you say is number two?
Okay, so the second one was really being able to translate what was going on in one industry and applying it to another, or another company. But the other one, Mark, and I think you'll appreciate this because you're brilliant at this, man. And that is, being able to do sequential marketing and being able to do multiple transactions, with whether it be upsells or whether it be after marketing types of things. But Jay was the guy that I learned this from, and again I learned it before I met him. I learned it through his working through some of the things that he was doing. But Jay had this ability that he would look at the marginal net worth of a client, right? So he knew how much he could invest in the initial transaction, even if he made no money. It came down to a question of cash flow, right? So even if the first transaction you got at a zero profit, if you knew that customer was going to buy so many times over such a period of time, you could actually project out the lifetime value of that client. And so many times people would focus on a single transaction and then they go off to the next person, right? They go off to the next prospect. And so, Jay would put together a strategy saying, okay, look, how can we take this single transaction and turn it into multiple transactions over time? How can we extend the value over time of that relationship? How can we get people to buy more? How can we get people to buy more? They often talked about, and it was funny, Mark. I mean, because like when I heard that and I saw that from Jay, it transformed my business career. At that time I had just gotten out of manufacturing. I had just gotten into business consulting, and so I could go into a business and I could say, okay, number one, how many clients do you have? How many people do you have in your database? How many customers do you have? And I would say, okay, and so how many of those people were active? And invariably, a large number of those people weren't active. So one of the things we would do is do a reactivation campaign. But once we got people active, and the people that were active, we thought, okay, well, let's sit down and figure out how we can either get people to buy more, get people to buy more often, or to get people to buy more over a longer period of time, so that we could elevate the value of each one of those clients or customers in the database. And you literally could transform a business in 30 to 45 days if not only could you reactivate people, but also you could go back to people and get them to buy over time. I mean, in sales, I mean, Chet used to talk about this a lot. One of the most difficult things, and probably one of the most expensive things that you have outside of the fulfillment of your direct product or service, is the cost of acquisition. And so if you spend $2 to go out and acquire somebody and they spend $5 with you, right? Yep. The value of that client is dramatically different than if you spend that same $2 and you get them to spend $5 10 times over, and you get them to spend $50 instead of $5. Your cost of acquisition is the same, but the profit margin that you have as a result of that transactional relationship or that client or customer relationship goes up dramatically.
Absolutely. I don't think you can overstate the importance of the marketing saw that, the cost of acquiring a customer is orders of magnitude higher of selling to the same customer. Yeah. And I want to share an interesting story from the history of online marketing. A lot of folks know that illustrates several of the points, several of the principles that you just talked about in one dense story. Now, the first time I learned that principle was from Joe Sugarman, another great mutual friend of ours. I think you're great friends with Joe too. Joe was probably the greatest salesman of gadgets of all time. Such a great guy and such a great innovator and such a beautiful human being on many levels. Now, when I first met Joe, he talked to me about that. He became later on in his life famous for blue blocker sunglasses.
Right.
And he was telling me about how, hey, Mark, when somebody calls up to buy blue blockers, we don't sell them a pair of blue blockers. We're selling them a pair for their grandma, for their kids, for their dog, their cat. You know what I mean? And when I thought about that he planted a seed in my mind and it germinated. And I want folks to understand that at that time, the thing that we now call the marketing funnel on the internet, right? An internet marketing funnel. The marketing funnels existed, but as we know them on the internet now, they simply did not exist. Now, the guy that's most famous for it now is Russell Brunson, who I was Russell's initial mentor back in the early days. Now, my company actually invented that. I mean, we were the first people to do that. And so another first was we started the first online ad tracking company. And so one thing that we did that was absolutely transformative that I think illustrates what you're talking about. So when we started selling people on ad tracking, it was surprisingly hard to get people to understand the significance of what we had done. And subsequently, we also invented the tracking pixel at that time, which is now used by everyone, right? But back, when you're doing stuff that's new, it's hard to get people to get it. So one night after I had that conversation with Joe, it germinated after a couple of days, and then it exploded into my mind in middle night, like around 3 a.m. I woke up and I could not sleep. And so what we started doing was, we were also the first ebook publishing company, right? So we started selling people ROI bot in the terms of what is now known as a one-time offer, right? A one-click upsell on the thank you page of these ebooks. Now, this is a common practice now. Everybody does this. But back then, this had been a couple of years later, and there were a few other people out there selling ebooks. Everybody selling anything on the internet, they were selling, and that was it. The thank you page was like, thank you, for your order, check your email. And so we created this little box which said, hey, you just bought this book, tick here for a free trial of ROI bot. And the uptick rate that we got on that was 50%.
Wow.
Now, that in itself was utterly transformative and illustrates the last principle that you talked about. But let's loop back to joint ventures, right? So then the next thing that happened was a couple nights later, after I'd had some success with that and just seeing it, another explosion occurred in my brain that kept me awake all night until the next day. And I said, oh my God, nobody else is doing this on their thank you pages. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get them to put this offer on their thank you pages of their orders, right? So people are buying a marketing related ebook, and then we gave them that pitch. Now that strategy was the single most important move we made to turn us into, it was already very successful, to something that was enormous. And I'll give you an example of how huge this was. Some of our affiliates were getting $50,000 a month commission checks from us. Wow. From doing this. It was absolutely huge. And the story that I just told illustrates, almost everything that you said and all of that.
Yeah. No, it's beautiful, Mark. I mean, and it's funny, because, the bigger the world gets, the closer we become, right? Mm-hmm. And being able to, do what you did, and then being able to see how that has evolved from what, the old mail houses used to do, and then, what Jay was doing when he first started out, and then doing, when you were, bringing these, these strategies and structures into a new technology and a new platform when no one else was doing it. And then to see what, guys like Russell were doing, and now what people were doing, even with some of the social media and, and with the bots and all kinds of things.
Yeah.
Same structures, right? Different pathway, right? Different highway, but it's really kind of the same processes. And technology has allowed us to become not only more efficient and more effective at it, it's allowed us to become more profitable, because our cost of doing that and our ability to respond and interpret the data and being able to react to that is a million times, a trillion times better than what it used to be, when you had to, you sent out a direct mail piece and you had to wait 6 weeks to see what the response was before you could figure out, what was going to be the next offer, or what was the best way to make an offer.
Absolutely. And I want to underline here, this goes back to your second point about seeing what other people have done and applying it metaphorically, and being, broad in your education and allowing that to inform your decisions. If I didn't allow myself to do that, I would not have been able to make those types of decisions. So it illustrates all three of those super important lessons that you're talking about. So let's move on to something slightly different here. And this is a little bit tangential, but I think probably quite important, and probably more important than I realize, as I read this question. I'm super curious in this moment of how you'll answer this. You just talked about the three most important marketing lessons. Mm-hmm. What would you say are the three most important non-marketing lessons you saw Jay illustrate?
I would say, and this is for me personally, but also I think, in my observations and in my collaboration with Jay, working with people and working with businesses, and that is learning how to revere yourself and revere your contribution, right? When I was doing, after I left manufacturing, when I was doing consulting, I was also doing some of my own seminars, more in the personal growth space, space around NLP and things like that.
Yeah.
30 years ago. But when I was charging $400 for a seminar, I was having a hard time not only selling it, but I had a hard time convincing myself, that I could even ask for that. And at
Mm,
that time, I think Jay was selling his seminars for $5,000.
yeah.
And he was doing the Mr. X book, for $400 or whatever it was.
Yep.
I was charging, I think $100 an hour, which for me was, like extraordinary that someone would give me $100 for, $100 an hour for a couple of hours to sit down and have a conversation with him. And Jay was, charging, I think at that time, $2,500 an hour, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when I get to meet Jay, it's like, hey, dude, where do you get the stones to do that? I mean,
Yeah.
now some of it obviously came from track record, but at some point in time, you have to make that offer the very first time. And
Yep.
Jay said to me, and I remember it to this day, he goes, if you don't revere yourself and if you don't revere your contribution, other people won't either, right? And so it was like, okay, be really, really clear about what it is that you bring to the table, and not only from an expertise standpoint, but from an outcome standpoint, right? If you were able to sit down with somebody, charge them $5,000 for an hour's worth of time, and you knew that it was going to be worth $50,000 or $100,000 or $500,000 for the business, you would be not only remiss to them, you would be remiss to yourself if you weren't able to ask for that. So if you don't feel that you have the ability to do that, it's not about the price that you're asking; it's about the value that you feel you're bringing. Right. So as soon as I was able to, say to myself, you know what, if I sit down and I do this, and when I'm successful, and as we're able to accomplish this, this is going to mean X for the business. And what the shift was for me is that when I sat down with somebody, I said, okay, what is it you would like to accomplish? And if and when we're able to do this, what would it be worth for your business? Right? People would say, $100,000, $150,000, $200,000. Okay, great. It's going to be $15,000 for the day. And as long as you were able to in such a way that not only number one, did they understand it, but also number two, you believed it. Number three, that you had the confidence and the ability, right? You had to have the ability in order to be able to deliver that. Otherwise, you end up with a lot of pissed off people. But being able to revere your contribution and revere yourself, so that you were able to really get what it is that not only what you deserve, but also what you earn.
Wow. Yeah. I could not agree with you more. And I want to clarify something here, because I think that some of the listeners might hear a little bit of conflict between that and what we were talking about egolessness. Now, a younger man may see those two things being in conflict, but there's a way to deconflict that. And I'm sure you probably know where I'm going with this, but I'm very curious to hear your take on that.
Yeah. Well, Mark, for me, and look, I mean, I probably give away more time, energy, and effort to people and businesses than I actually charge for, right?
Yeah.
Now, but I also know that in order for me to be able to sustain a business, in order to be able to sustain myself and my family, I have to charge money, right? Or I can get it in goodwill, I can get another currency, I guess. But money is really about stored value. But if I don't, number one, offer or ask for something in return for what I offer, number one, it creates an imbalance in the universe. I truly believe that. Number two, it's hard for people to take free seriously, right? I'm going to give you free advice. Okay, yeah, you're just like my brother-in-law. He gives me free advice all the time. I ain't listening to that guy either. So sometimes people have to understand that there's an investment in something in order to be able to take it seriously. But also, I mean, I think if you're working with business people understand that business is about, at some point in time, a transaction, right? In business, nothing occurs until a sale takes place, right? It could be a barter exchange. I mean, it could be a goodwill gesture that you're getting something in reciprocation, but you have to be able to generate some income. Now, look, if I'm going to charge this person $15,000 so that I can go to 5 other people and not charge them a doggone thing, to me, that's part of my contribution. I do a lot of work with not-for-profits. I mean, I donate a lot of time and work with other people that I wouldn't accept the money, right? And I do it not because I want to be patted on the back, but because it makes me feel good about my contribution. But if I don't have the ability to work with somebody who can afford the investment and ultimately reap the return, it doesn't allow me to do things for other people. And look, and I always have the ability to say, look, this is what I normally would charge. But if this is what you can, this is what you can afford, or this is what you think is reasonable, let's do this, or I can defer some of that. But ultimately, it's about creating a transactional relationship so that they can deliver value, so that you can deliver value. And if you want to be able to share value in other ways, that you have the ability to do it. And if you don't charge at some point in time, whether it's $15 an hour or $15,000 a day, you're just not going to have the ability to maintain or sustain or operate a business.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And in fact, the primary premise of the irresistible offer is about the nature of business is transactional. That now we have this money system, but we used to have barter. But money is just a symbolic representation of value, and it's still the same thing. Everything is a quid pro quo. And when you understand that, and when you also what I don't talk about in the irresistible offer, but I think about a lot, talking about creating this imbalance in the universe by, if that quid pro quo is not fair, there is a price that will be paid. The universe extracts the value somehow.
Yeah. And look, Mark, I mean, no one gets to drink from a dry well.
Yeah.
I mean, and if at some point in time, you don't replenish that well, everybody dies of thirst.
Wow. Beautiful metaphor. Beautiful metaphor. Okay, if you could go to the second non-marketing thing, I almost want to leave it at that because that's such a beautiful thing. But if there's more,
yeah, I guess Jay doesn't use this term, but it was the term that I coined when I was working with Jay, and that was the law of compound credibility, right? If one person says, hey, Spike's a great guy,
yeah,
I'd like to think that there's at least one person that would say that, that means something on one level. But if 10 people say that, or 20 people say that, or 1,000 people say that, that level of credibility of that opinion and of that reputation and of that standing accelerates. And so, the very first time I went to Jay's office, I was going to hire him as a consultant for a company I was working with. And, Jay's not an inexpensive dude, right? And so this is a public company, and I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to justify paying, the guy what we were going to pay him. And I said, Jay, look, can you just give me some, give me some testimonials or give me some endorsements, give me some references? Jay didn't say a word, swear to God. He got up, walked out of his office, came back with 3 books, slammed them on the table and said, there they are, right? It was the 502 incredible case studies. Right. And so, it was all these case studies that Jay had, people giving him endorsements and testimonials and situations where he was involved in this and he was involved in that. My whole argument, my whole concern, everything went out the window because he was able to provide that to me. And then, of course, then he had people like Tony Robbins and Mark Victor Hansen and everybody, all these well-known personas and brands and people and experts and things, that were endorsing Jay and singing his praises. I mean, who the hell was I to sit there and question what the guy was asking for from a money standpoint, right? So, I mean, so just having that ability to build not only your reputation, but also the credibility that you have because of the people that you've actually impacted, and be able to do it not just in a self-testimonial way, right? Yeah. When I worked with this guy, it generated me $1 million in new profits. It generated me, $5 million in new revenue, and being able to quantify that. Right. Now all of a sudden, gave him a whole different standing, even though I was a fan and I loved his copy and I heard about his stuff and I listened to his Tony Robbins interview and all these kinds of things. When he brought those things out with it was so overwhelming that there was no objection in the world that I could ever make. And it also made it easier for me to take it to my board and other people that were involved in decisions saying, look, we got to bring this guy on board because it's worth X to us. So that was the second one.
Well, I'll just interject really quickly here. I am constantly on the lookout for that. I have my my spidey sense up for that. Whenever there's an opportunity for me to learn how to build my own brand more. Now, a lot of people from the outside, again, may see that as an ego-driven thing. No, this is a strategic move. It's a deliberate strategic move. Mm-hmm. If I know that somebody that is recognized by other people is saying something powerful about me, I mean, I have a database of testimonials. The company that I run now, Simpleology, we have deliberately curated thousands upon thousands upon thousands of testimonials. We even built that into our marketing processes to get that because we see the absolute value of that. Yeah. Because it is enormously important in everything that you do.
Yeah. The other one, Mark, and this may be 2 separate ones, but I think they're related, at least as I'm thinking about it, may come out differently as I articulate it. But, it really had to do with investing first, right? And this wasn't just a marketing thing. Jay was really, really good at saying, look, I will do this for you, right? And then in some cases, either not asking for something or not asking for something right away. So it's, it's kind of like the Cialdini thing, right? The law of reciprocity. When someone does you a favor, you feel obligated to do something else in return. But as part of that offer, Jay would in many cases say, okay, look, I'll give you this, but then he would really give you this, right? And I don't know if you've ever been to any of Jay's programs, as an observer. But he was notorious for the big box of stuff.
Right. The fun effect, right?
Yeah. And so when you signed up for the program, you got this, and 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 you got this. So not only was it the value bundle, right? When you put all the stuff together, it's worth $250,000. I had $1 million. But it also was about the investment, right? So I'm going to invest in this relationship first. I'm so confident that when you come to this, that not only are you going to get the impact, the outcome that you want, and not only will you continue to do business with me and continue to transact with me, everything that I'm putting up here up front not only will benefit you, but also it shows you that I'm willing to invest in our relationship first, right? It's so it's Jay has a wonderful way of crafting language and crafting things, and so like he would say, you know what, I'm willing to invest in our relationship first, and whatever it was, right? Whether it was a free 15-minute consult, whether it was a big box of stuff or whatever. I'm investing in the future of our relationship by doing this for you now, right? So it presupposes a bunch of things, right? It presupposes, number one, that he's a generous guy, but also it presupposes that you're going to be doing things on an ongoing basis because you're going to be developing a relationship and not a transaction. So just the subtleties of language and the subtleties of words, but also having that aligned with the gestures, to me was something that to this day, I think a lot of people do it unconsciously. And I think especially if you're a generous person who likes to give, and I like to think myself a generous person, I like to give. But being able to tie that generosity not just to the fact that it makes you feel good, but also to see that generosity as an investment in the relationship for all parties to benefit was something I learned from Jay.
Absolutely, and I'll give you one Jay story that corroborates what you're saying to let let folks know that this is not just whistling Dixie here. Back in those early days with Chet and Jay and I, first kind of dancing around a little bit. They sent me a box for free, and it was about stuff that he charges $50,000 for. And I remember when that thing arrived, just a massive thud, volume upon volume upon volume of stuff. And this was not just garbage. There was just so much enormous value in all of it. I spent days just like combing through this stuff, and I still have that to this day.
Yeah.
I'm sitting in a storage facility right now, because I'm traveling around so much. One day I hope to get back to it, but I still hold on to that stuff. And it was one of the things that initially, in fact, did impress me enormously. It was like, you charge, people go to one of your events, they pay $25K, and you're giving me like, 2 or 3 times what people normally get at one of those events that they pay that much for. It was like, I felt very well treated, I must say.
Well, it's funny, Mark, because the first transaction that I did with Jay, even before we engaged him as a consultant, is that I did a barter transaction for Jay's entire library.
Okay.
So that was from the time he recorded anything up until I think 1999.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first day I got a box, as big a shipping box as you can get, that showed up in my office. I think I got 3 or 4 or 5 more over the course of several days. There was so much stuff. I thought, okay, well, you know what, I'm going to go. I couldn't have gone through all this stuff in a lifetime, but literally it was everything that Jay had done for a 15-year period of time. So,
what did you barter for it, by the way, out of curiosity?
I actually bartered trade dollars with him in a trade exchange. So he was I had earned some trade dollars, so I was able to buy that, and he was able to use the trade dollars to buy some things for his wife and some other things, and use it on some other things in his business as well.
Very nice. Yeah, that sounds like classic Jay too, because the guy just rub 2 nickels together and $1,000 pops out of the air.
Yeah,
beautiful stuff. I want to transition into slightly different tack here now, and I'm gonna ask this question. I'm gonna offer something up because I'm asking a difficult and slightly embarrassing question about him, and I want to ask you what you would say Jay's 3 biggest mistakes are. That he made, and I want to offer some mistakes that I made that I regret to this day, and I'll just give a couple. They primarily revolve around patents. For example, you invent the tracking pixel and you don't patent that.
Yeah.
Everybody in the world is using it. It hurts a little bit.
Yeah.
See that, right? When you launch the first ebook publishing company, and you coined the word ebook, you don't, the domain ebook.com was available, and I didn't. And so many little mistakes like that I made in the early days, and every now and then I'm reminded of that, and it stings. Would you say that there are some things like that Jay would share?
Yeah, and I think Jay's been very open about this, so I don't think I'm talking out of school or revealing any deep dark secrets. But I think Jay would tell you that he was slow to the internet, as you were mentioning, because he was a little bit intimidated by this whole internet thing and all this, because you get to be a certain age, Mark, and I'm older than you, and I'm about the age, well, I'm a little bit older than Jay was when I first met him, but I remember my mom and her husband. I used to have to go over to their house twice a year to change the time on their VCR, right? And every year I would show them how to do it, but it's like, okay,
12,
yeah.
right?
And so I'm not equating Jay with the VCR area, but because you get to be a certain point, I think sometimes you just say, it's just easier to do what I've done, or I'll avoid certain things if it's outside of my norm, right? Because my kids, grew up with computers. My grandkids, have used iPads and iPhones and all those kinds of things, from the day they could push a damn icon. Right. And so their level of understanding, is completely different. I mean, I did a speaking tour with Jack Welch about 5 years ago.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And one of the things, in China, and one of the things that we had, we had these big groups that were there, and they were there to see Jack, and I was speaking on it, but I mean, it's his event, we were doing it together. But we had these kind of VIP sessions in each city before we did the large event.
Yeah.
And one of the guys, and the one event we were in Beijing, and they had I don't know, 50 or 60 of the largest companies, technology companies in China that were sitting in the room with Jack and I. And one of the guys was the like vice president of technology or something like that in one of the companies. And he asked Jack, like what would he do, or what does he do with the companies that he works with when it comes to technology? And at that time, I don't know if it's still the case, but Jack sat on the board, or he had consulting agreements, or was involved with more than 10 companies that had over $1 billion valuation. Okay, so even though he's somewhat retired, and he's still pretty active. And he said to the guy, he goes, well, first of all, he goes, when it comes to technology, I don't hire guys like me. I hire guys and women that are like 35, right? Yeah. He goes, because they grew up with a whole different structure of their mindset and their perspective. And what's difficult for me at whatever his age was at the time, I have no basis of it's like learning a language when you're 2 versus learning a language when you're 50, right? I mean, it's the brain structure is different. So I think for Jay, when the internet came out, it's like, okay, I'm really, really good at this whole direct response thing and print ads and mail houses and mail pieces, but now you got this stuff over here, and so he brought guys like you and like Rich Sheffrin and Stephen Pierce, and they were doing things like that. So I think Jay was a little bit slow to come to the internet. Right. The second thing, and Jay and I used to arm wrestle about this all the time. Yeah. Jay would want to try 10 things, simultaneously, and I'd want to do things more sequentially. Yes. And no exaggeration, one time I was in Jay's office and we had a big whiteboard where we put all the different things down, different initiatives, different opportunities, different clients, different projects, different programs, whatever we were doing. And it was more than 60. I think the number was 63 things we had on the board. And I said, pick any 5 that you want. He goes, but what if those 5 don't work? And I go, but Jay, just pick 5. And so we would, we'd kind of go back and forth, and we'd narrow it down a little bit. We'd probably get it down to maybe 15, which is less than he was comfortable with and more than I was comfortable with. And we approach those things, and so to me, it was one of those things that, Jay had such a broad vision of things that sometimes I thought, at the time, that he would take on too many things. He probably thought that I took on too few. He probably thought I was too conservative. Yeah. And so I think what would happen is that it would sometimes diffuse, some of the effort and some of his energy, because like all of us, he's got a finite capacity in terms of time and energy and all those types of things. But it was also the fact that he didn't want to choose the wrong one and miss the opportunity, right? Because Jay wanted to make sure that, hey, look, this opportunity may be here today, and if I make it sequential, right, instead of simultaneous, it might be 6 months, might be a year till we get to it, and maybe too late. Maybe the opportunity goes away, maybe the opportunity changes. So to me, I think that was at times, not always, but I think at times, sometimes where Jay would be not as selective on some of the opportunities. Yep. And then, then the last thing is that, I think Jay, like you, Mark. I mean, when you're a pioneer, or you're a person who's a visionary, you're a person who brings something to a market, or you bring a new technology or a new approach, for the very first time. I mean, you just expect that people are just going to respect that and revere that and honor that for the rest of their doggone life, and they may. They don't. No, because as soon as they teach somebody else, and they teach somebody else, and they teach somebody else, So I don't know that there were a lot of things that Jay could have patented, but I think there were a lot of things that from an organization standpoint, whether it be e-learning or whether it would have been the J. Abraham Institute or some things that we had talked about but didn't pursue. It put Jay in a situation where a lot of his body of work wasn't organized and systemized in a way that people could approach it on scale. So it's kind of like the Tony Robbins things. I mean, sometimes you still have to show up and throw up on stage in order for people to to appreciate it, right? And and if you can put it into a system or a structure, where people can consume it without you having to show up, it allows not only for your business to be more scalable, it makes it transferable and also makes it saleable, right? And so while Jay has a great brand and he's got a great reputation, a lot of what Jay still does to this day, is predicated on his mental capacity and his physical energy in order to be able to really have the impact that he wants.
Wow. I really hope that folks listening now, I mean, nobody now is going to make that first mistake, right? Because everybody understands how important the internet is at this point, I believe. But those last two are such classic mistakes that can take decades to correct and learn. And I hope that the folks listening to this who are making those mistakes, and I know many people, in fact, I know one of Jay's new proteges who's making probably both of those, well, at least the second one right now in this very moment. I hope that they really take it to heart because, man, those are some hard lessons that cost you enormous opportunity. But if you can get that now, it will shave decades off your learning curve, I would say.
Well, look, Mark, I mean, and I say this not just because we're friends and colleagues, but I say this because I'm a fan of yours as well. And, and I've seen the evolution of what you've done, over the years as well. And one of the things that I've always admired about your business, and I think it's the danger for a lot of people who become gurus, is that, to the notoriety and the privilege of presenting, right? And so the business becomes so dependent upon them being in the room or writing the next book or whatever, that, when you create a Simpleology, what's it been 10, 11 years now?
Yep, 11 years.
Yeah, and so to me, I thought, man, this is brilliant because it wasn't dependent upon you, right? I mean, obviously, you're the guy that has to run the business and you're the guy that has to put the things in and be the guy who said, look, if only you could do this and if only you could do that. But, if you went on vacation for 6 months, the thing doesn't go away. If you decide, to go to the Himalayas and meditate for 2 years, it's still going to be there when you get back. And there are a lot of people that, especially from the information sharing standpoint or from the advisory services standpoint or from the consulting or speaking business or the, even the writing, don't understand that, that you will have a job that you can't quit if you don't have some sort of transcendence in your contribution that goes beyond your physical effort.
Damn right. And I'll tell you one way that I was able to overcome that, even though my voice is there in so many of the products, it's systemized and recorded, right? I don't have to physically be present. Right. And that's one of many, many ways that can be addressed. And it's a whole other great conversation, but thank you for bringing that up because even though you very graciously, point that out, that company is designed well, I still make that mistake in many ways to this day. So,
well, look, and just so you know, brother, I'm not above my own criticisms. So, I've got some of my own game too, man. So,
that's one of the things I love about you, man. All right, now let's flip this around. If you could channel Jay, and Jay we're looking at young business owners today, and if you were to pinpoint what the three biggest mistakes today's business owners are making, what would you say those are?
And again, I don't know this to be true. It's just my perception and my perspective of what I think Jay would say.
Yeah.
Is that, number one, you have to have a business that transcends you, right? What I was just speaking there. Number two, you have to have, an insatiable curiosity. It's something that I've always admired about Jay, because we traveled, for years together and spoke all over the world. Jay was constantly engaging people in conversations. When I would get on a plane, I'd want to, put on the TV, put on headsets, open up a book, and just, zone out. Jay would be having conversations with everybody around, and not just, hey, how's the weather? I mean, he had this insatiable curiosity of asking questions, and he would learn so many things. And then we'd show up at a program or we'd show up at a consult, and he would take something from that conversation that was fresh in his mind and recent, in his conversation, and say, oh, and by the way, and so I think it allowed him to not only be not only to have longevity, but to have relevance for a long period of time, because he was constantly and always learning. So I think he would share that with people, that you can't rest on your laurels. And then the other thing I think was probably come down to what we were talking about earlier, and that is being able to deliver value and to revere that value that you're offering in such a way that it allows you to get what you get what you earn and to get what you deserve. And I separate that, Mark, because to me, I deserve what I earn. I don't deserve what I don't earn, right? And so if I don't earn value, I shouldn't receive value. And if I do, I don't feel right about it. And so I think, if you understand that value and you're able to share that value, you're able to receive value, which allows you in turn to to share value on an ongoing basis.
Right. Yeah, and it's great that we're sort of reiterating some of those questions, because the importance of that is being underscored with that. So hopefully folks are catching in on that. So I have two more things here, and these are quite interesting. If Jay were to advise a young budding business entrepreneur today, how would he actually begin the conversation with that guy?
Yeah, look, I mean, I didn't learn this from Jay, and it's not an original articulation, but there was a guy, and he's still around, but taught me what was the world's shortest course in sales, right? It was AQAL, which stood for Ask Questions and Listen. Okay, so a lot of times when people are consultants or they're advisors or they're experts, I mean, they show up and they tell 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 and tell, and sometimes they come up with a great solution to the wrong problem, right?
Right.
And so Jay, would not only did he have the curiosity, but strategically he would go through and he would ask questions and he would write things down, and and he would just make sure that he kind of did what he called a dissection, but it was almost like a 360-degree evaluation assessment, more like a forensic analysis of the business. And so I think asking questions, before you start offering advice or you start offering the solution, right? If you don't know what it is that they need or what it is that that they want, to offer it, no matter how well you articulate it, probably isn't going to be nearly as effective.
That's absolutely beautiful, and it alludes to so many philosophical implications as well. One thing that God, this goes back to Socratic method, right? But Stephen Covey, emphasized that it's seek to understand before being understood, right?
Yeah.
And that the brilliance of that and the depth of that wisdom has been echoed throughout the millennia. So I want to turn this around on you now, and I know this is going to be, it's interesting in the context of this conversation.
I don't know if you can hear me, Mark, but you froze up on my end. Oh, there you are.
Yeah, well, I lost you for a second there.
Yeah.
I'll restate the question here just to make sure we have continuity for the recording. But so folks understand that are watching this, this is pretty raw. We're both in separate locations around the world, doing this on Google Hangouts, and we gotta work with the technology we've got. So I consider you to be probably the guy that Jay has trusted the most over the years. I think you're probably the one who has been closest to him, probably his most trusted confidant. I know you're probably going to, be humble and say, no, that's not true. But I mean, from seeing it on the outside, it certainly seems so to me. And I've heard that echoed by a great many people. So I will reject any denial on that point. So what do you think it is that you bring to the table that has allowed you to have that position? If you could sum that up in some way.
Well, one, I think because I had a tremendous amount of respect before I knew Jay, and a tremendous amount of respect for his work, but also I think because Jay and I had different backgrounds and different perspectives on a lot of things, and the fact that we had a chance to work together in other circumstances first, he had a chance to see what I could do and vice versa, so I think we had a different understanding of each other's skill sets, but we don't learn, we don't learn by confirmation, right? The whole confirmation bias thing. We learn through contrast, and we learn through diversity. And so, because I was a hands-on manufacturing guy who understood efficiency. Later on, I got into understanding optimization because I came from a bit of the corporate world. I was less entrepreneurial, early in my career. The fact that I had skill sets of actually, running larger businesses, so I understood not only just, the transactional side of things, but, at one time I had well over 1,000 employees for some of the businesses that I ran. So I think I was able to, to bring some things that Jay not only valued, but also appreciated and understood. Wasn't necessarily his experience or skill set. Didn't mean that he couldn't understand it. Didn't mean that he couldn't figure it out. But like going back to the first program that he and I did in Malaysia together, he didn't even tell me I was going to be speaking at the event with him until we're walking in the room. A week before we went to Malaysia, he goes, "Hey, what are you doing next week?" I go, "I don't know." "Why?" He goes, "You want to go to Malaysia?" I go, "Yeah, sure." And so he goes, on the plane over, he goes, "Well, I might want you to help me out a little bit." I mean, I thought, like maybe go to the hotel and tell them that they're out of water or something. And we're walking in the room, and he goes, "No, I want you to be on stage with me." So I thought, what am I supposed to marking on a whiteboard or what? He said, "No." He said, "When someone asks a question, I'm going to turn to you and I want you to give me your opinion." And so there were some situations where people had challenges, opportunities, situations that went beyond marketing, that I was able to really offer perspective. I think more from a general business standpoint, right? Whether it was a challenge with their partners, or whether it was not legal advice, but just understanding some of the challenges that people understand, that people face in business, either from a regulatory obstacle or other things, from because I was an attorney, not because I was a CPA or whatever, but because I understood, the financial side of things, and I also understood the transactional side of things inside of a business, not just outside the business. I think Jay appreciated that, and along with that, I always knew that it was Jay's show. I mean, if I was speaking at his program, it was Jay's program. If I was doing my programs, they were my programs, and so it was never a thing where I felt like I had to be equal to Jay or better than Jay. And so we had the ability to kind of hand things off and kind of share things and do it without the ego investment. And sometimes when you're working with somebody else, as a speaker, as an expert, as an advisor, as a consultant, sometimes it's very, very difficult because people get into competition as opposed to the collaboration and cooperation.
Yeah, that's a classic mistake I see happening a lot. And when you're dealing with a guy who is very deliberately, curating preeminence, on the surface level as well, you have to understand that you have to be egoless and sit back. So that demonstrates a lot of wisdom. Are there any questions you think I should have asked you that I did not?
And Mark, that's a great question, and I'm not sure if I learned it from you, but I ask that question too when I do interviews as well.
I might have learned it from you, man. Probably.
No, I'm sure you didn't, because I don't do that many. You've done many more than I. I honestly, I can't think of one, Mark. I mean, I think you did a great job of not only putting some questions that kind of guide your thinking, but also just interactively. I mean, I think you're not only a great interviewer, but you're also a great collaborator, contributor, to the process, right? Because you have your own perspectives, your own insight.
Thank you.
But also, we've had some shared experiences. So I mean, I think we kind of play off each other. But I really can't think of anything, Mark. I mean, I guess the only thought that I would just leave you from my end in parting. I admire and respect not only you, but what you're doing here, and that is, you're taking somebody else. And you're kind of putting them up on a pedestal, and you're asking not just that person, but you're asking people around that person, for their perspective, and for their understandings or their learnings or whatever it is from that. And I think there's a great service for people like you doing that for people in the marketplace, because sometimes things get lost in translation. Sometimes continuity isn't maintained from one industry to the next, one generation to the next, one technology to the next. And being able to pull things like this together and take not a historical perspective, but a relevant, real world, real time example, and say, okay, this is how this started here, but this is how this relates to what we're doing today in the future. I think it's just a great service.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for those words and for that recognition. Now, if anybody listening to this does not want to work with you. They're crazy. So how do you want people to connect with you? What do you want to say there?
You know what? Probably the simplest, easiest thing, Mark. I mean, because I don't maintain a strong presence online. I mean, everything that I do is either through referral or firsthand introduction. The best way for people to learn about me is just to go to LinkedIn or something like that, or just the regular social media platforms. I'm pretty easy to contact through any of those mechanisms, and I'll leave it with that.
All right, beautiful stuff, man. Spike, listen, you know how much enormous respect I have for you, and how much I value our friendship over the years. And I got to say, man, I respect you even more after this conversation. Stuff came out of this that genuinely surprised me. So thank you so much for spending this time. This is the holiday season while we're recording this, and Spike quite generously pops in to show up for this. So man, it's great to know you, my friend.
You too, brother, and I appreciate the opportunity.